tensions are intensifying between longtime allies, Israel and the United States, over the handling of the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has defied the U.S. on the two-state solution. Netanyahu has rejected the Palestinian statehood, claiming that this will continue to compromise Israeli security. Now, what does this mean for the relations between the two nations? Let's get some answers and some analysis there from Spector, who's an international relations expert who now joins us. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, despite all the pressure, despite all of that and what's at stake, Benjamin Netanyahu is not budging. What should we make of this?
Well, I think what we should make of it, well, first of all, good morning, good to be with you. We should make of it, it's a continuation of Netanyahu's position, which has been long-standing. And if we reach back far enough, we realize that one of the keystone to the Netanyahu policy has been to denigrate the idea of a two-state solution and to devolve small amounts of power to a very weak Palestinian authority on the West Bank, and to essentially ignore Hamas control over Gaza after the 2006 election, when the Israelis, in fact, withdrew from Gaza entirely, on the theory that eventually the world will simply get tired of fussing about this and people will begin to accept what is, and that will become the new norm. But, of course, the events of October 7 and then, of course, the Israeli invasion thereafter have put that in a very different light. And what we see now, I mean, as far as I can understand it, and from what I have been able to read or listen to, remember, Tony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, has now been back and forth to the Middle East. I think it's 5 times since October 7 in an effort to move parties away from their current positions. The Biden administration seems to be keeping in its mind a larger strategic vision that will happen, I think, in their hope of hopes, that will happen before the American election, or at least progress to it. And that would include a pathway that can't be shunted aside of some version of a Palestinian state, giving the Palestinian Authority that's housed in the West Bank a role in a post-Hamas Gaza, or what's left of it, and in return, the normalization or something approaching that between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then some other states falling in as well. But to keep that momentum going, and this is still a notional plan, obviously, to keep that momentum going, Biden has to tread rather carefully among the constituencies in the United States, which feel enormously strongly that they should support Israel no matter what. And what are those constituencies? A good chunk of it is the evangelical Christian fundamentalist world, a large portion of it, which has been very, very staunchly pro-Israel. And to some extent, of course, although it is now split, Jews in America who don't have nearly as much voting weight as the evangelicals do, but also as a result of the evangelicals, Republicans in the Congress who are staunchly in favor of Israel in its perhaps maximalist agenda. So this is not one of these things that that's going to sort of come together quickly at the clap of hands. But that, I think, is in broad outline is the Biden course, and of course that course depends on whether he can somehow push Netanyahu into agreeing to begin to the various parts of that. That's a heavy lift.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're essentially saying is that because of the U.S.'s larger strategic vision hanging in the background somewhere, that the U.S. has no other option, at this point in time at least, to continue its unwavering support for Israel despite this impasse?
No, I'm not exactly saying that. I'm saying that there is that support is there, but at the same time, because of international circumstances, there is an equally strong impetus now for the United States to begin to push Netanyahu away from the strongest, most aggressive versions of their fighting in Gaza. And at the same time, keeping an eye out for the way in which domestic American political pressures play out. That is one heck of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. So the bigger vision, what would that entail in trying to get Benjamin Netanyahu to abide and really just do what has been suggested?
Well, I mean, it obviously, one of the things that it includes is some version of the second state in a two-state solution. It involves some form of agreement on the way in which that second state gets governed. And I think the Biden administration is strongly in favor of a re-energized Palestinian Authority. Remember, at this point, that's being run by a man who is in his 80s, who is not well, and in which there is, by common understanding, a fair degree of inefficiency as well as corruption, and at the same time somehow bringing Gaza back into the unified fold of that re-energized Palestinian Authority. That, of course, also requires support from neighboring Arab states like Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, and then the next version of it, of course, is given if that happens, then the Israelis and the Saudis reach some sort of accommodation leading toward normalized relations. And by that point, then the reconstruction and rebuilding and plan for Gaza gets created, funded, and implemented. Now, for the Biden administration to be able to score a win on this, of course, all these pieces have to come together before early November of this year, which is, in practical terms, shrug your shoulders on that question. I don't think that's possible. But you might, if everybody is very lucky, you might start seeing the slightest indications of that move.
So what would you say is the broader implications, I mean, with the relations that you've described, but also looking at the other parties involved here, because the hopes in some circles were that the Gaza crisis could result in Israeli and Palestinian leaders restarting these diplomatic negotiations and kickstarting the dormant peace process?
Well, one thing we both left out, of course, is the instability in other parts of the Middle East, and that includes the Houthis in Yemen, who are busy disrupting international commerce at an alarming level. The Iranians, who have decided that it's in their interest for whatever reason to attack Pakistan and Iraq, and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and the southwestern corner of Syria, perhaps, to begin to indicate that they too should not be forgotten. And all of these parties are busy shooting rockets, and somehow that outer ring of questions is going to impact on the inner ring of things we've already talked about. How to bring the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority into a negotiation along the lines that we've been discussing probably means Benjamin Netanyahu gets moved away from being Prime Minister of Israel. A lot of Israelis would like to see that happen for several reasons. One, they don't like the way in which he's been able to, or he's tried to maneuver his and his wife's corruption charge out of the courts by trying to change the basic law for the judiciary in that country. And second, the fact that the country was not well prepared for the kind of attack that Hamas was able to stage. And third, the expressed intent of the Israelis on the Gaza invasion in the first place was to liberate the hostages that were captured on October 7th, and that's at best been a very partial success. And so from that perspective, politically, domestically, Netanyahu is increasingly weak, although most Israelis apparently support the idea that crushing Hamas is an appropriate agenda for the country, but not the president, not the prime minister. That's the distinction we need to make.
Yes. Is Palestine a real threat to Israeli security? Because, I mean, that's essentially what Benjamin Netanyahu has said, just to perhaps back up his defiance.
Well, I mean, it's demonstrable fact that Hamas has been able to fire thousands of rockets, most of which did not hit targets, into Israel proper over the last number of months. It's a demonstrable fact that so has Hezbollah. Again, not too much damage because of the abilities of an anti-missile defense system, but that threat is there. And what October 7 did point to for Israelis is that the high-tech border fence and the vaunted Israeli Defense Force was unable to deal with a dedicated incursion, not necessarily because they were outnumbered or outfought, but because they were not effectively prepared for that kind of military action. And if you look at the map, the Israelis will always point out to you that if the entire West Bank were ceded to the Palestinian Authority in toto as an independent state, at the narrowest point, somewhat north of Tel Aviv, it's only a few miles between that territory and the Mediterranean Sea, and obviously well within the range of artillery, let alone rockets. And so those are the strategic elements that go into Israeli calculations. But sometimes you have to take a deep breath and move bravely, and that's Netanyahu at this point doesn't seem to be the man who's prepared to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in on this discussion. International relations expert Spector giving us an update there. Some analysis on a developing international story.